Hello, and welcome back to Grave Whispers. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoy whispers rising straight from the grave, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, get comfortable. Dim the lights if you dare. Relax your mind. Let the outside world fade away. And let's begin. Story 1. Every night, I used to be up there in the dark, alone above the world, looking down at the homes scattered under me like warm little islands of light. From that height, every house looked peaceful. I would see yellow windows glowing through the black, cars parked in neat driveways, porch lights shining on a wet grass, and I would start making stories in my head about the people inside. In one house, I imagined a family finishing dinner, talking about work and school and nothing important. In another, maybe a couple was laughing over drinks, music playing low, happy to be warm and dry while rain touched the roof. Farther out there would be a farmhouse with only one dim light on, or no light at all, as if the place had already gone to sleep before the rest of the world. I passed over all of it night after night. First the homes, then long empty roads, then fields, then dark forest. And beyond that, the cold, open stretch where land ended and the sea began. Up there, the whole world looked gentle and simple. But the truth was, I was freezing in that cockpit, half numb, half drunk, and so tired that the clouds themselves looked like they were trying to pull me down into them. The sea below did strange things to my eyes, too. In the distance, the waves caught bits of moonlight and twisted them into shifting silver shapes. Sometimes it looked like whole cities moving in the water. Sometimes it looked like the water was climbing up toward me. I had already decided that I wanted that to be my last flight. Not because I was ready to quit the job the right way, or because I had some clean plan for my life. I wanted it to be my last because I knew I was done. I knew if anyone ever looked inside that plane after I landed, I would be finished. I had been drinking while flying, and not just a little. At my feet were empty bottles rolling whenever the plane shook. Some were under the seat, some near the pedals. One was pressed against the wall by my boot. I remember staring down at them with a stupid smile and thinking that when I opened the door later, they might all tumble out onto the tarmac in front of whoever came to meet me. What a scene that would be. Maybe I was too far gone to be ashamed. Maybe I had crossed that point hours before. The air inside the cockpit smelled stale and sour, a mix of metal, damp clothes, old coffee, and alcohol. My hands felt heavy. My eyelids kept lowering on their own. Still, I kept flying. The engine sound became like a lullaby, steady and distant, and the clouds ahead looked calm and soft. I told myself I could make it. I told myself I only had to stay awake a little longer. The last thing I clearly remember, before everything broke apart, was the feeling that the whole sky had gone quiet around me, as if it was waiting for something. A hard burst of rain woke me up. It hit the plane so suddenly and so loudly that for a second I thought something was tearing through the metal. I jerked in my seat, choking on my own breath, and realized with horror that I had actually fallen asleep while flying. My neck hurt. My mouth was dry. My vision swam. The windshield was a gray blur of rain and darkness, and I could not tell what angle I was at. My body felt wrong, slow, and weak, like I had been drugged. I grabbed for the controls, but my arms were heavy and my thoughts would not connect in the right order. Was I still level? Was I turning? I looked at the instruments, but they might as well have been written in another language. Lights flickered. The nose felt low, then lower. My stomach lifted into my chest. I remember the sick drop of realizing I was not gliding, not descending under control, but falling. My first clear thought was simple and stupid. I'm nosediving. I'm going to die because I fell asleep drunk in the air like an idiot. I tried to pull back. I think I did. I think I shouted. Maybe I blacked out before impact. Maybe I never really understood what happened at all. Everything after that comes back in broken pieces, and none of it feels possible. When I opened my eyes again, I was lying face down on a beach. The sun was on the back of my head, warm and steady, so real that for a moment I almost believed I had dreamed the whole flight. Sand was stuck to my face. My clothes were soaked through and stiff with salt. My mouth tasted like blood and seawater. I pushed myself up, and every part of me screamed in pain. Beachgoers were staring at me from a short distance away, frozen in place with that same stiff look people get when they see something they know is wrong but don't know how to approach. A woman had her hand over her mouth. A man in sunglasses stood with a phone in one hand but was not moving. Kids farther down the shore had gone quiet. I remember looking at them and thinking, with complete emptiness, where am I? That question frightened me more than the pain. I did not know what state I was in, what coast I was on, how long I had been out, or where the plane had gone. I looked toward the water, half expecting to see wreckage, smoke, anything that could explain me, but there was only surf, bright sun, and gulls circling over the tide. I tried to stand, took one step, and the cold hit me so hard that my knees gave out. It felt like ice had been packed around my bones, not just normal cold from wet clothes or ocean wind. This was deeper. It was inside me. I dropped to the sand, shaking so badly I could barely breathe. I remember hearing someone yelling for help. Then the beach tipped sideways and went black again. There are scraps of memory after that, but they do not connect. White lights above me. A ceiling with stains. The smell of disinfectant. A voice asking me my name. Hands turning my head. Pain in my jaw so sharp it made me see sparks. Someone saying not to move. Straps or tape against my skin. A machine beeping somewhere near me, then nothing. Then too much light. Then dark again. I cannot tell how much time passed between the beach and the next moment I clearly remember. It could have been hours. It could have been days. What I know is this. I woke up again, and this time I was standing in a forest at night. I was wearing a hospital gown that barely closed in the back. My legs were bare below the knees. My feet were either naked or in something so thin it made no difference. Around my neck and jaw was a stiff metal brace, the kind that keeps your head from turning. It dug into my shoulders and rubbed against my chin every time I moved. I reached up to touch it and felt tape, dried blood, and skin swollen hot under the cold night air. The darkness around me was deep and wet. Tall trees blocked almost all of the sky. The ground was soft in some places, full of roots and leaves in others. For several seconds, I just stood there, unable to understand how I had gone from a beach to a hospital to a forest. Had I wandered away? Had someone brought me there? Was I dreaming under sedation? I called out, but my voice came back weak and broken by the brace. No answer, no road noise, no sirens, no lights, only the quiet scrape of branches moving in the wind. Then I felt that cold again, and this time it was stronger than before. It started at the base of my spine like a small piece of ice had been pushed into me, and then it climbed upward vertebra by vertebra until my whole back shivered. The feeling reached my neck, spread behind my eyes, and settled in the center of my head with a pressure that made me nearly fall. Along with it came a whisper, not in my ears, It was inside me, as clear as thought, and yet not my own. It said, "East is a cold, warm city. It is trashed and gross. 4 miles. In the hospital is a child with a broken ankle." The words were flat and strange, almost like someone describing things they could see from far away, but did not fully understand. I froze. Before I could make sense of that message, the whisper changed into the sound of a child crying. Not ordinary crying either. This was loud, close, desperate, full of pain. It burst through my skull as if the child were trapped inside my head. I covered my ears even though I knew the sound was not coming from outside. I wanted to scream back at it to stop. Then, as quickly as it came, it faded, leaving only the cold shaking in my spine and the dark forest around me. I had no better idea than to walk east. If my mind was breaking, at least it had given me a direction. Maybe there really was a city 4 miles away. Maybe if I reached it, I could find out who I was, what had happened to the plane, why I was dressed like a patient and wandering through woods in the middle of the night. So I started moving. It was slow and ugly work. The neck brace kept me from looking down properly, so every step felt dangerous. I had to stretch my hands out in front of me like a blind man, feeling for trunks and branches before I ran into them. The dark was thick enough to hide holes, rocks, and fallen limbs until I was right on top of them. Sharp twigs snapped under my feet and sometimes through them. Once I kicked something hard and nearly went down face first. Another time I stepped on what felt like a jagged branch and had to bite back a cry. My feet were soon wet, and I could not tell if it was mud, dew, or blood. Every few yards I had to stop and catch my breath because my ribs hurt, and the brace pressed into my throat. 30 minutes went by, maybe more. Time moved strangely out there. 4 miles did not sound like much when I first heard it, but in that state, it felt endless. Then the cold started again. A shiver climbed my spine, sharper than before, and the whisper returned. "Northwest," it said. "Something is moving fast." I stopped in place. "How fast?" I whispered back before I could stop myself, as if that thing inside me could hear and answer. For a second, there was only the sound of leaves shifting. Then the reply came, tight with urgency. "Too fast." Right after that, a loud whistle tore through my head. It was not a tune, not a bird call, not wind. It was one long, cutting note, high and strong enough to make my teeth ache. Along with it came the sound of footsteps, quick and heavy, moving over dead leaves and uneven ground. I spun as much as the brace allowed, trying to look toward the northwest, but the forest was only black shapes. My heart started slamming hard enough to make me dizzy. I did not know what was coming, or whether the voice was warning me, guiding me, or leading me into something worse. All I knew was that standing still felt like dying. So I began walking again, faster now, stumbling more than moving, listening over my shoulder for anything that might be closing in. 10 minutes later, I heard the whistle for real, not only inside my head, but somewhere out in the trees. It came from far off at first, thin and sharp. 2 minutes passed, and it was closer. Then another 2, closer again. Every time it sounded, the distance between us seemed to shrink by a terrible amount. It was moving through the woods with impossible speed, covering ground that should have taken much longer. 4 more minutes, and it was close enough that I could hear leaves crunching under whatever feet it had. Panic took over. If it was coming from the northwest, then I needed something between me and it. I found a thick tree trunk and pressed myself behind it, facing the opposite direction, trying to make my body as small as I could. The brace made that nearly impossible. My breath was too loud. My whole body shook, and not just from fear. 1 minute later, the whistle came again, so near it felt like it cut the air beside me. I remember thinking with perfect clarity, this is it. This is where I find out what followed me out of that crash, or out of that hospital, or out of whatever place I should have died in. I stayed behind the tree and moved only my eyes. At first, I saw nothing. Then I saw two lights. They hung in the dark at a height where a person's eyes would be. But they were brighter than eyes had any right to be. They looked more like small headlights, hard white circles without warmth or reflection. I could not make out a face around them, not even a shadowy one. That was one of the worst parts. Usually when light shines in darkness, it fades at the edges, revealing shape, depth, and surface. This did not. The contrast was violent. There was black, and there was light, and almost nothing in between. The thing stood still for a moment somewhere to my left. Not too close, not very far. Close enough that I knew if it stepped forward, I would hear it breathe. The whistling stopped. The forest went silent with it. Even the wind seemed to hold back. The lights remained fixed in the dark, and I had the awful feeling that they were studying the tree, measuring it, measuring me behind it. Though I still could not tell if they were true eyes at all. Then the lights began to rotate slowly to the right, as if whatever carried them was turning its head or body in a circle. I realized with a sick rush that if I stayed still, the beam would sweep over my side of the trunk and catch me. I had no choice. Very carefully, trying not to scrape bark or snap a twig, I moved around the tree in the opposite direction, keeping the trunk between us. The bark dug into my shoulder and back. My feet slid in leaves. The light stopped on the tree, and where it landed, it shone so strongly that the rough bark looked pale and unreal, almost glowing. From that angle, the beam seemed to stretch on forever through the woods, a long white path with no end. Then the lights shifted again. The whistle started once more, lower now, almost thoughtful. It moved away through the trees, and after a while the sound faded into the distance until only the dark remained. I did not wait. The second I believed it was gone, I started moving east again with all the speed my broken body could manage. I stumbled, limped, caught myself on trunks, and kept going. My feet were throbbing by then, and each step sent pain up my legs, but fear pushed me forward. After what felt like another hour, the trees began to thin. I saw a weak orange glow ahead, then the outline of buildings, then pavement. I had found the city. The voice had been right. It was east of the forest, and even in the dark it looked worn out and dirty. Smoke or steam drifted from somewhere low. The streets were lined with old brick buildings, chain-link fences, broken signs, and patches of trash gathered in corners. A few windows were lit, but most looked dark or boarded up. It was not a pretty place from the ground. Ugly was the first word that came to me. Still, as I stood there at the edge of it, in a hospital gown with blood on my feet and salt still in my hair, I had a strange thought. From the air, from high above on a cold, clear night, it probably would have looked beautiful. Every city does from the sky. Distance is kind to everything. What happened after that should have brought answers, but it did not. People found me. Police asked questions. Doctors examined me again. I had injuries that matched a serious crash. Damage to my jaw, neck trauma, bruising, cuts, exposure, dehydration. But nobody could explain all of it together. No one could tell me for sure where the plane went down, how I ended up on that beach, or why I later wandered out of a hospital into the woods. Maybe some records existed and were lost. Maybe the story was buried because of what I had done. Maybe I was too drunk at the wrong moments and too unconscious during the rest. I know I would have been fired anyway, if the job had still been waiting for me. That part never mattered much after. What mattered was what stayed with me. The cold never left. It still begins in my spine without warning, and when it does, I know the whisper is coming. Doctors scanned me, tested my hearing, checked my nerves, asked about drugs, asked about psychosis, asked how much I drank. I told them the truth as best I could. I have never abused anything except alcohol. They gave me pain medicine, anti-anxiety pills, therapy referrals, and looks that told me they thought the rest was trauma. But trauma does not tell you what is happening miles away and then prove itself right. Trauma does not place a child's crying in your skull before you ever see the hospital where that child lies. Trauma does not warn you that something is moving too fast through the trees and then let you hear it before it arrives. Even now, sitting in a room with the window shut, I can feel the first icy tremor starting to rise through my back. It hurts so badly, I have to grip the arms of the chair. The whisper has not spoken yet, but I can already hear what comes with it. A dog is barking somewhere south of here, about 3 miles away. I know exactly where the sound is coming from, even though no one else in the room hears it. That is how it is now. The pain is unbearable. The shivering never truly stops, and sometimes in the middle of the night, I catch myself listening for a whistle in the dark, afraid that whatever passed me in those woods did not lose my trail at all. Story 2. The only place to find decent flowers where I am from is horrible. Truly, genuinely horrible. The worst years of my entire life were spent working in that dingy little shop with its never-ending supply of fresh flowers all year round and its weird rules and its strange standards and everything else that came with it. If I had to make the choice between plucking my own eyes out with a pair of tweezers and ever working there again, I would happily take the tweezers without a second thought. You see, my old boss, the owner of the place, was a man named Lysander, and he was a total piece of work. The job listing had never mentioned the more unusual aspects of the shop. All that Lysander had told me. A scruffy 20-something-year-old with nowhere to go and absolutely no money to my name was that I would be working behind the counter. Nothing else. The way he had put it, all I would ever have to do was retrieve flower arrangements for customers when they came in. That was it. He let the shaken, slightly off-putting manager handle the rest of my training. And that guy did his best to move me from cleaning duties to the more decorative side of things. To be honest, none of us really knew what we were doing, and thank God we were lucky enough to never get any custom orders. Lysander never helped out at all. If I am being totally honest, I never really saw the man outside of my initial interview and the occasional random checkup he would do every once in a while. But hell, all I was worried about back then was making rent for the month. The second I graduated from university and got my first real job, I left. I moved to Arizona, and I have not been back since. Well, until now. It is my daughter's birthday today. My little girl Daisy is turning 9 years old, and here I am scrambling for a gift at the last minute. I have already got her 2 other things, and you would figure that a bike and a Kindle would be more than enough. But me and my wife have this scrapbooking tradition we do every single year where we press one daisy on her birthday and document it. It is a sweet little tradition, and do not get me wrong, I love waking up early to give flowers to my girls. I mean, as much as I hated my old job, it was never really the flowers that bothered me all that much. And seeing my baby run up to me whenever I open the front door with flowers in my hand makes everything worth it. It is just that knowing what I know about this place, I would really rather cut my losses and just buy the flowers tomorrow. But my wife Nora wants us to start the day off by presenting the flowers first thing in the morning, and Daisy knows to expect it too. trust me. I tried every other store I could think of. Just my luck that my brother-in-law wanted us back in town during February. Because everywhere I went turned up completely dry. Every single store I walked into, I would end up standing at the register defeated, asking the cashier if they knew of any other place besides the flower shop. And my list of stores had ended with the very last one I tried. So there I found myself, snow crunching underneath my tires as I parked in front of that unassuming little shop in the dead of winter. And from the smell of pollen that hung in the air around me, I knew the flowers I was expecting to find were there. The bell overhead gave a soft chime as I stepped inside, and I stopped right at the threshold, looking over the dreary oak floors and the yellowed newspapers taped to the walls and the dusty shelves lined with vases. My eyes drifted over to the arrangements of flowers next to the counter before they made it to where Rob usually sat. But he was not there. Rob, my old manager, was not sitting behind the counter, which was really strange because he had been working there long before I ever started. And he was still there when I had left. Lysander had always told me that Rob was the only person he trusted to run things in his absence, which was basically all the time, but that is beside the point. And Rob himself had grumbled to me more than once about not letting this place die when I had casually asked him about his hobbies outside of work. He should have been here. He was always here. But instead, a girl who looked like she was maybe 16 or 17 years old sat behind the counter. She stood up pretty quickly when she heard the bell chime, kicking the stool she had been sitting on underneath the desk before giving me a cheery wave and a loud greeting. "Welcome to Flowers Florals for You." God, what a mouthful of a name. More concerning than the ridiculous store name, though, was the very obvious fact that the cashier in front of me was not Rob. Had he quit? Was he just not working today? He was never the type to just up and leave the way I had done all those years ago. I shook my head. In any case, I still needed the flowers. Rob or not, I was sure that someone had already trained this girl. Sure, Lysander was not the best guy in the world, but I would not expect even him to stick a kid in a place like this without any preparation whatsoever. She straightened the desk out, pushing a few papers to the side so I could see the list of flower arrangements that I was all too familiar with. We both kind of stood there for a moment, each of us waiting for the other person to talk first. "Oh, right, sorry, I forgot to." She fumbled for a few seconds before pointing down to her name tag. "My name is Najma, but most people call me Star. I will be assisting you today." She grinned at me, looking expectant. Nice to meet you, Najma. I am Mark." She blinked at me. I panicked a little. Was I supposed to say something else? I never really did much talking with the customers when I worked here. The girl pointed to her name tag again, which helpfully had a bunch of star-shaped stickers plastered all over it. "Nice to meet you, Star," I said, hoping that was the right answer. "There you go." Star tapped the list once more. "Sorry about that. I just find that Star is usually a little easier for people to say. Besides, it is fun. You cannot really be a downer in a flower shop, right?" She commented lightly, dusting off her apron. I begged to differ. When I was working here, the whole approach was get in and get out. That, or maybe my pleasant attitude back then, had something to do with the fact that I was baked out of my mind half the time. Star cleared her throat. If you do not have anything specific in mind, you can start by taking a peek at the arrangements." "No, thank you, I am, actually." I tried to cut in before she went on with the same script I had been trained to use years ago, but unfortunately, she was faster and louder than me. "Right now, we have a Valentine's special, but, if I am being honest, it looks pretty cluttered. There is nothing wrong with it, if that is what you are into, but I mean, I really prefer this pink one right here. Star slid her finger over to the dahlia and ranunculus bunch on the list. I am really not looking for, I started again. Or if the occasion is not a celebratory one, we also have this mourning arrangement over here. She looked back up at me, cringing a little as she realized that she had not even asked me why I was there in the first place. Sorry for your loss. I am getting flowers for my daughter's birthday. Oh, thank goodness. Because it would have been really awkward if I said that and you were actually here for a funeral. Giving a quiet little chuckle, Star folded her hands over the list. Anything specific you would like, if you are undecided? No, I know what I am looking for, thanks. I realized my tone had come out a little blunt, so I adjusted. Daisies. I am looking for daisies for my daughter's birthday. Star took a look at the prearranged vases sitting around her, frowning a little when she did not spot any daisies among them. She hummed for a second, then turned back to face me. I patted my pocket in anticipation of the next question. The daisies were not out here on the floor, and the obvious next step was the greenhouse. Ah, sweet. How old is she turning? Right? That was not the question I was expecting. I did not used to think I was a very effective employee, but compared to this level of conversation, I was beginning to think I had not been all that bad after all. Not that I felt any ill will towards this kid. I mean, I tried way too hard at my first job too. But all I wanted right now was to go home, have a late dinner, and set things up for Daisy's birthday tomorrow. She is turning 9, I answered, glancing in the direction of the greenhouse. Cute. What is her name? Daisy. Oh, picking up some daisies for your Daisy. That is so neat. She smiled, then took a breath. All right, before I can grab those for you, I'm required to let you know how our greenhouse works. You know, it has to be kept in a very specific condition for it to produce flowers year-round. I nodded quickly. Yeah, I know. I used to work here. Star straightened up. Oh, no kidding? Yeah, around 10 years ago, give or take. I waved a hand towards the greenhouse. I have my payment ready for it to take. I just need to get in there, and I will be out in a little bit. Star shook her head, an apologetic look crossing her face. Sorry. My boss does not let me send customers in by themselves. She raised a finger when I started to protest. Even past employees. Past employees used to be able to go in on their own, but after a manager or someone came by and messed around in there, my boss changed things up. She picked up her keys and shrugged. Sorry again. You mentioned you have your payment with you, though, right? I nodded once again, feeling my pocket. I had a rough estimate of how many daisies I wanted, and I had adjusted accordingly. All righty then, follow me. Star began walking, and I realized that she had slowed down her pace enough to match mine. She nodded towards a door that we passed along the way. A small plaque on the door simply read, Office. Usually my boss comes with me down here. I do not know. It kind of creeps me out a little, coming down here by myself. She shuddered, and I just shrugged. I used to make Rob fetch things from the greenhouse for me, so I never really had that problem. At least not very often. It is actually kind of a coincidence that you are a past employee, because I have never had to take a customer back here alone. We turned into a darker, warmer hallway where the scent of pollen grew noticeably stronger. So at least if I mess something up, you have got my back. Yeah, I had absolutely no intention of being anybody's mentor. The best advice I could give this girl was probably to quit while she still had some light left in her eyes. When we reached the hallway just before the greenhouse, She looked over at me, and I could tell that her whole customer service act was starting to buckle under her growing apprehension. All right. You know the rules, yes? Do you want a refresher, or... I am okay, thanks. All I had to do as a customer was follow Star anyway. She nodded, and we both fell silent as we made our way down into the greenhouse. The air shifted from warm to humid the moment we stepped inside. Stay near the door. I kind of forget where the daisies are. She mumbled, taking her phone out of her pocket and flicking on the flashlight. I will call you over when I find them, okay? I nodded and leaned against the wall. The place looked different from what I was used to. Granted, I had not been in the greenhouse very often when I worked here, but from what I remembered, it had not been nearly as overgrown as it was now. The scent of pollen was almost dizzying, which I definitely did not remember from before. The floors were a little sticky, and I could hear Star's footsteps as she walked away from me. It was dark, far too dark for a greenhouse. Something felt awfully wrong about the place. There was this foreboding pressure pushing in on my ears, and the silence was only broken by the quiet huffs of the air conditioning system. I shook my head. There was nothing particularly wrong with the place right now. In fact, it seemed better maintained than the last time I had seen it. Rob, or whoever was taking care of the greenhouse these days, was doing one hell of a job, but I just could not shake the feeling that something was off. The beam from my phone's flashlight illuminated a huge, unidentifiable plant growing upward in the middle of the room. Near the door, I could see a gray, sludgy mass. It was trailing across the floor towards the plant. I could not see Star anymore, and she had not called me over yet. A little walking around could not hurt, right? Besides, I needed to try and calm my nerves, which were starting to build up inside me for reasons I could not quite explain. So I followed the path that the sludge had made throughout the greenhouse, trying to recognize anything from the few times I had actually been in here myself. My flashlight caught a few of the different plants along the way. An orchid, some carnations, and then my beam fell onto something else entirely. It was a large orange bud, surrounded by a mess of roots and dirt. I could not tell exactly what it was, and stepping closer did not make it any more apparent. But God, it stank. The smell hit me like a wall when I was still a few steps away from the thing, and as I bent down to get a closer look, it only grew stronger. Gagging, I stepped back, only to notice that something had glinted when I swung my flashlight in its direction. It was sitting right next to the orange bud, and I crouched down to quickly grab it. I had guessed it was probably loose change or something like that. In retrospect, I really should have just minded my own business. When I reached for it, the shiny thing felt like it was connected to something else underneath the dirt, and it did not come out with my first tug. It was not a coin then, so what was it? Driven now by curiosity, I slipped my phone into my pocket, the flashlight escaping only a tiny bit through the denim. It took another tug. Was it some kind of metal pick? It took me 2 more tugs after that, my fingers slipping once or twice before the thing finally gave way. Whatever it was, it felt cool and smooth against my palm. Stepping away from the orange bud, I turned it over in my hand. I could not tell what it was just by touch. It felt pretty small, almost the size of a die, and it was almost pointy at the bottom. I took my phone from my pocket and turned the flashlight beam back onto my open hand. It was a human molar. The humming from the air conditioning went completely still as I looked back at the orange bud. Only now, in the mess of roots and dirt surrounding it, I could clearly see similarly planted teeth. Their crowns were just barely peeking through the soil they had been placed in. I counted them. 31. counting the one in my hand that made a full set of 32, a complete set of adult human teeth. "Mark, I found the daisies!" Star's voice rang out through the greenhouse, and I cursed out loud. I guess in my panic I had slipped a tooth into one of my pockets without really thinking about it. Walking quickly back towards the door we had entered from, the sludge that I had been carefully stepping around got onto one of my boots. And the more I walked, the more I realized that it was not quite gray. By the time I had made it close to the door, and when I had just started to see the glow from Star's flashlight ahead of me, I realized what I had been walking through this entire time. It was congealed blood. I will be perfectly honest here. I nearly threw up right then and there. Bile burned its way up my throat as I felt woozier by the second. What the hell was going on? Whose blood was this? Whose teeth had been planted in the dirt back there? Did both things come from the same person? Why had I not smelled the blood earlier? The pollen must have been covering it up this whole time. By the time I was standing next to Star, looking down at the daisies, all the questions racing through my head had come to a careful, forced halt. All I wanted to do was leave this place. She handed her phone to me, and I pointed the flashlight at the flowers while she held up her shears. "How many daisies would you like?" Her voice came out a little less confident than it had been a few moments ago. Had she known about the teeth? About the blood? God, the floors were sticky, and now I knew exactly why. "I do not. 3. 3 daisies." I swallowed hard, then pulled a bag of withered daisies out of my pocket that I had collected from other stores earlier that day. You see, what I had learned from working here 10 years ago was that the greenhouse was alive, in a sense. It had never been something I really cared much about, but Rob certainly did, and he was the main attendant. There were a few rules about respecting the place and keeping it clean and making sure you were mindful of how much you were taking and so on. But the one rule that stood out above all others was this: whenever you take anything from the greenhouse, you must replace it with something of equal or greater value. The greenhouse would always find a way to sustain itself, but that did not mean there were not ways to take care of it properly. The most common payment was usually uglier flowers, or even weeds would work. But you should never, ever take from the greenhouse without giving something back. Star held her hand out for the bag, simply shaking out the contents into the dirt before cutting 3 fresh flowers from where they were growing. Breathing a sigh of relief, she gave a quick, reassuring smile. "All right, we can go back upstairs and get these wrapped up for..." Her sentence was abruptly cut off by a low rumbling sound, and what started as the air conditioning malfunctioning quickly shifted into something else entirely. It became a shriek, a long, rising, awful shriek that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Star flinched, looking between the fresh flowers in her hand and the withered ones she had just shaken out into the dirt. Her eyes darted between the two before they turned to me. "I, Mark? Did you take anything else? Any other flowers? It is okay if you did, we have got to replace them before we can go back up." Her sentence was punctuated by the shrieking going up a few decibels, and the whole greenhouse seemed to vibrate with it. My stomach dropped as I became suddenly and painfully aware of the human molar sitting in my jean pocket. I watched a few roots slowly stretch towards where I had been standing just a few moments ago near the door, and the shrieking only grew louder and louder. Star furrowed her eyebrows and covered her ears, waiting for my answer with less and less patience. The walk back to the counter was silent. I kept finding my tongue running over the new gap in my teeth as Star walked quietly ahead of me with 3 fresh daisies in her hand. It had not been pretty. I was sure there was still some blood lingering on the hedge clippers I had used as makeshift dentist equipment, and I still felt sick about the teeth and the thick, jammy blood I had walked through. I felt even sicker remembering the sound of my own nerve root snapping away from its home in my gums. The pain was sharp and deep, and it had taken everything in me not to scream. The tooth I had originally taken still burned a hole in my pocket. I still have no idea whose it is. Was that the consequence of not giving back to the greenhouse? Was that how it sustained itself? By taking from people who did not follow the rules? By the time we had gotten back to the counter, the bell above the front door chimed once more. We both turned our heads at the same time, only to find Lysander standing in the doorway, sporting a gardening apron and carrying a duffel bag. He smiled at Star and raised a hand in greeting. "Hey, kiddo." His eyes moved over to me, and his smile became just the tiniest bit flatter. "Hello, Mark." I found it a little strange that he had recognized me so quickly after all these years, but I only gave him a slight nod. I was far more concerned about my throbbing, bleeding mouth than making conversation with him. Star, however, jumped up the moment she saw him. "Lysander!" She slid a frozen sponge in a Ziploc bag across the counter to me, then turned her full attention to her boss. "The greenhouse, is it normal for it to make so much noise? I'm not really sure if I messed something up in there." Lysander's smile did not leave his face as he answered her. Considering that both of you made it out, then yes. Which, by the way, good job." He lifted up a pale, bony hand in a thumbs up. "First time in the greenhouse alone was a success, I see." Success, it seemed, was defined very differently by Lysander than how I would define it. Star, however, beamed and nodded at the praise. "Thanks." In 2 long strides, he was already halfway to the open door that led to the hallway. "I will be in the greenhouse." Star waved at him, and then she began wrapping my daisies. "Sorry about your tooth. I had no idea any of the plants in there were worth that much." She said it with genuine guilt in her voice, and I shook my head, waving the apology away. I had not told her about what I had found. Sure, I was freaked out of my mind, but I decided that she did not need to be freaked out too. Besides, it was my own stupid curiosity that had made me take the tooth in the first place. None of this would have happened if I had just stayed by the door like she told me to, but whatever the hell was going on in this place, I wanted absolutely no part of it. Maybe I would send the tooth in anonymously to the police so they could figure out what was happening here. But all that was left for me to do was take the daisies home and forget any of this ever happened. Star finished wrapping the flowers and handed them to me with one last smile. "Happy birthday to Daisy." She raised her hand in a friendly wave. I waved goodbye, stepped out into the cold, and started driving back. Looking around at the 7 o'clock February sky, I thought about the look on my girls' faces when they woke up tomorrow morning to find fresh flowers waiting for them in the living room. The wind came in through my car window that was cracked open just a sliver, cooling me down from the humid, sticky greenhouse, and while I started to let myself forget about what had happened, one more strange detail came back to me. Star had mentioned a manager messing around in the greenhouse, and among the teeth, the congealed blood, and Lysander showing up with a duffel bag and a gardening apron, I started to put things together. A thought kept circling in my mind over and over again, one that I could not push away no matter how hard I tried. Where the hell was Rob? Story 3. I never thought my degree in political science from Delhi University would lead to me managing a social media campaign for a literal corpse, but here we are. It is 2026, and Indian politics has officially gone completely off the deep end. Last month, a group of ancient elite aristocrats from South Delhi and South Mumbai stepped out of the shadows and formed a brand new national political party. They called it the Vampire People's Party, or the VPP. Nobody saw it coming. Not the journalists, not the analysts, not even the people who spend their entire lives predicting the unpredictable mess that Indian politics tends to be. One day there was nothing, and the next day there were press releases going out with a stylized bat as the party logo, and everyone across the country was either laughing or absolutely terrified, sometimes both at the same time. The Election Commission tried to reject their application almost immediately. Their official grounds were straightforward enough. Dead people, they said, cannot contest elections. It seemed like a reasonable position to take. But the VPP had assembled a legal team that was, quite frankly, one of the most frightening things I have ever seen in my professional life. These were high-ranking corporate lawyers, the kind who bill $400 an hour and have not seen natural sunlight since sometime in the early 90s. They filed a counter-argument so airtight that the commission sat in silence for 3 days before responding. The lawyers pointed out that under Article 21 of the Constitution, the right to life does not explicitly exclude the undead. They also noted with great legal precision that roughly half of the existing parliament already looked and functioned like reanimated mummies, so drawing a hard line specifically at fangs felt a little inconsistent. The commission eventually approved the application. Nobody really knew what else to do. Their official campaign slogan was printed on every banner, every poster, every pamphlet that went out across the country. Ab ki bar, no more var. Henceforth, no more daytime. It scanned beautifully in Hindi and translated just well enough in English to confuse foreign correspondents, which honestly worked in our favor because confused foreign correspondents write longer articles. I was brought on as their PR consultant. The reason, as far as I could tell, was simple. The ancient nocturnal community is completely clueless about modern Indian marketing. They understand influence, they understand power, they understand the slow accumulation of wealth across centuries. But Instagram Reels and Twitter trending algorithms are a different kind of dark art entirely. And they needed someone who spoke both languages. My boss was Rajkumar Virendra Singh, a vampire who had been turned sometime during the British Raj and who still communicated as though he was performing in a DD National period drama. Every sentence he spoke came with a certain theatrical weight that was impressive in a drawing room and mildly catastrophic in a press briefing. Our first campaign meeting was a disaster from the opening minute. Virendra leaned forward in his chair, his fangs catching the dim yellow light of the basement office we had been given as our headquarters, and he told me with complete seriousness that the party must promise the masses they would drain the blood of their enemies. He seemed to think this was an excellent opening message. Clear, direct, honest. I sat across from him and rubbed my temples for what felt like a very long time. I explained as patiently as I could that we could not say drain the blood. This was not 18th century Transylvania. This was a country with a functioning media ecosystem and approximately 800 news channels all running on pure chaos and outrage. What we needed was language that felt like policy. What we needed, I told him, was to call it aggressive wealth redistribution and resource mobilization. It sounded like something a finance minister would say in a budget speech. His eyes glowed a faint crimson as he turned the phrase over in his mind. And then he nodded slowly and said, "Brilliant," which was the moment I realized this job might actually be survivable. The issue of daytime rallies came up next. The Indian summer is not kind under normal circumstances. And it is genuinely fatal if you are a being made of undead flesh who turns to ash under direct UV exposure. I had already thought through this problem on the train ride over. I pulled up a PowerPoint presentation on my laptop and walked him through the solution. We would shift the entire campaign to night rallies only. We would call it the Midnight Awakening Initiative, which sounded visionary and a little mysterious, which is exactly the register you want for political branding. The target audience was already sitting right there waiting for us. The IT corridor in Bengaluru, where software engineers regularly worked past 2 in the morning. The call center workers in Noida who had permanently lost track of which side of the clock they were living on. Night shift security guards across every major city who had been invisible to every other party for decades. These were people who were already, in some meaningful sense, dead inside. They would relate to us. Virendra stared at the slide for a long moment and then asked me what PowerPoint was, which is a separate story entirely. The manifesto went viral before we had even finished designing the final layout. I do not fully understand why the internet responded to it the way it did, but I have a theory that people had simply been waiting for a political party that was honest about what it wanted, and funny enough about it that you could share it without feeling like you were endorsing something genuinely dangerous. The 24/7 nightlife policy promised a mandatory restructuring of the entire economy to a 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. workday, and every software engineer under the age of 30 responded as though they had been personally freed from chains they had forgotten they were wearing. The healthcare section promised free universal iron supplements and proposed converting Red Cross blood banks into a fair-price public distribution system, which somehow got more positive coverage than any actual healthcare proposal in recent memory. The infrastructure plank called for a nationwide ban on streetlights using harsh UV bulbs and a replacement of all government office glass windows with opaque black curtains, which the architecture community received with surprising enthusiasm. The agriculture section classified garlic as an invasive toxic weed and an offense against public harmony, which caused a small crisis in Rajasthan, but went down very well in Bengal. The opposition parties panicked in the way that people panic when they do not understand what is happening to them. They scheduled a traditional political rally at noon, right in the middle of a brutal summer day, and they publicly dared our candidates to show up and face them in the sunlight. It was meant to be a dramatic moment, a visual statement about who was real and who was not. Virendra responded by sending a team of highly paid human influencers to stand outside the venue and distribute free sunscreen and bottles of Rue Afza, along with small fans printed with the party symbol, which was the stylized bat in sunglasses. The local news covered it as a story about the VPP showing empathy toward voters suffering in the summer heat. We won the entire news cycle without a single candidate leaving the building. The live televised debate was the moment everything changed permanently. Virendra sat across from a veteran human politician whose primary skill was volume. This man had built an entire career on the ability to speak louder and longer than anyone else in any room. The anchor looked back and forth between them with the barely concealed excitement of someone who had been promised a fight. The human politician slammed his fist on the table and accused the VPP of wanting to turn Indian youth into nocturnal monsters. He said Virendra represented a threat to culture, a threat to tradition, a threat to the very soul of the nation. He said they wanted to suck the country's blood, which was technically accurate, but not quite in the way he meant it. Virendra did not shout back. He did not raise his voice even slightly. He leaned forward in his chair with the patience of someone who has been alive for a very long time and has learned that volume is almost never the most effective tool available. His eyes shifted to a deep hypnotic purple, the kind of color you find at the bottom of something very old and very still. His voice dropped into a smooth, aristocratic baritone that seemed to fill the studio in a way that went beyond the speakers. He said, very quietly, that the previous governments had been sucking the blood of ordinary people metaphorically for 70 years, through taxes, through fuel price hikes, through inflation that ate through savings while ministers gave speeches about resilience. They had taken the blood of the working class and given back potholes and promises. He said that the VPP was at least being transparent about its diet. And in return, he added, they were offering immortality, zero sleep deprivation, and free public transport after midnight. The studio went completely silent. A single camera operator started clapping from behind his equipment. By midnight, the hashtag #WeWantImmortality was the #1 trend in the country, and it stayed there for 4 consecutive days. Managing the internal operations of a vampire political party comes with HR challenges that no university course in political science ever prepared me for. The youth wing leader got caught trying to turn a prominent opposition member during a heated assembly session, which required me to issue a press release within 20 minutes describing the incident as an unfortunate involuntary reflex brought on by low blood sugar. The opposition demanded a formal inquiry. We requested that the inquiry be scheduled after sunset as a reasonable accommodation, and then waited to see if anyone would push back, and nobody did, because by that point people were a little afraid of us. The campaign funding situation was technically complex. The VPP did not take corporate donations on principle, mostly because they had a more direct method available to them. The candidates would occasionally hypnotize wealthy individuals into signing over portions of their estates, which was illegal in several ways, but nearly impossible to prosecute because every transaction was sealed with a wax stamp and recorded in ancient Sanskrit on documents that predated the Income Tax Act by several centuries. The Enforcement Directorate opened an investigation and then quietly closed it after 3 of their senior officers started showing up to work, looking pale and confused, and asking if anyone had noticed how pleasant the nighttime was recently. Tomorrow is the final phase of voting. The exit polls are projecting a historic landslide. Across every major news channel and every independent polling agency, the numbers tell the same story. Human politicians are beginning to accept what the numbers mean. You cannot compete in a long game against a candidate who genuinely does not need sleep, has no pension to protect, and can influence judicial outcomes through direct eye contact. The math does not work in your favor. I am sitting in the campaign office right now. It is late. The Delhi skyline outside the window is dark and quiet in the way the city only gets in the hours before 4 in the morning, when even the traffic noise drops to almost nothing. Virendra walked in a few minutes ago holding a silver chalice with something thick and dark inside it. He looked more satisfied than I have ever seen him look, which for a man who has been alive for over 150 years is saying something. He placed a cold hand on my shoulder and told me I had done excellent work. He said that when the VPP formed the government, I would be appointed Minister of Information and Broadcasting. Permanent tenure, no retirement age. Just the work, going on and on for as long as I wanted it to. I thanked him. I meant it. Then he told me there was one small condition. His fangs extended slowly past his bottom lip as he explained that cabinet ministers would need to be fully committed to the long-term vision of the state. A small physical adaptation would be required. He held out the chalice and asked if I was ready to sign the contract. I looked at the chalice. Then I looked at my student loan balance, which I had checked that morning out of habit, and immediately regretted. I thought about my rent going up again in 2 months. I thought about the absolute unrelenting chaos of the world outside that window, the noise and the heat and the exhaustion of being a human being in a country that was moving faster than anyone could follow. Unlimited youth, a job that lasted forever, an active nightlife and no more mornings. I leaned my head back and told him to make it quick. We had a press conference at midnight, and I still needed to finalize the talking points. Story 4. It is almost impossible to explain how messed up I am right now. Honestly, I do not even know where to begin, but I will try my best because I need to get this out of my head and onto something solid, something real, before I start convincing myself that none of it actually happened. But it did happen. Every last bit of it happened, and I have the wound on my hand to prove it. It all started on my very first night in the apartment. I had just moved in. Boxes everywhere, furniture barely set up. The whole place still smelling like fresh paint and cleaning chemicals. I was exhausted from hauling everything up the stairs and unpacking what little I could manage before my body gave out. I collapsed into bed that night, expecting to sleep like the dead. I was wrong. I did not sleep at all. Not really because of the skittering. It was faint at first, so faint that I almost did not catch it over the hum of the refrigerator in the other room and the occasional car passing by outside. But once my ears locked onto it, once my brain registered that tiny, repetitive sound, there was no going back. It burrowed into my awareness like a splinter, and no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, I just could not shake it loose. Tick, 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 back and forth, all night long right above my head. It sounded like something small was trapped inside the ductwork, scurrying along the aluminum, with these sharp little clicks that echoed through the metal. My first thought was that it was a bug of some kind, maybe a beetle or a roach making its way through the ventilation system. Then I considered the possibility that it might be a mouse, or worse, a rat. I remember lying there in the dark, staring up at the ceiling, and thinking to myself that I really hoped it was not a rat. Rats meant droppings, chewed wires, maybe even disease. I did not want to deal with that on top of everything else. I wish more than anything that it had just been a rat. I really do. Because what it actually turned out to be was so much worse than anything I could have imagined lying there that first night. The next day, I tried to go about my business. I unpacked a few more boxes, organized the kitchen, set up the bathroom. Normal stuff. But the entire time I could hear it. It never stopped, not even during the day. That constant tick, tick, tick moving back and forth along the same path, over and over again, like it was stuck in some kind of loop. I started paying closer attention, tracking the sound with my ears, and I realized that I could follow its exact route. It would start at the vent on the left side of my bedroom, the one mounted high on the wall near the ceiling. From there, it would scurry along the inside of the wall, following the ductwork or maybe just running along the gap between the drywall and the exterior. And it would end up right at the top of my closet door frame. Then it would turn around and do the whole thing again. Left vent to closet door frame. Closet door frame to left vent. Over and over and over. It never deviated, never paused for more than a second or two. Just that same mindless back and forth, accompanied by that awful ticking sound that I could not get out of my skull, no matter what I did. I stood there in my bedroom for a while, watching the vent. It was one of those cheap plastic covers, the kind that snaps into place over the opening in the wall. It had been painted over, white on white, clearly slapped with a fresh coat right before I moved in. The landlord's special, as I like to call it. Slap some paint on everything and call it a day. The edges were uneven, the finish was lumpy, and you could tell that whoever did it did not care even a little bit about doing a good job. They just wanted it to look passable for the new tenant. For me, I stared at that vent for what felt like forever, waiting for something to reveal itself. I expected to see little legs poking through the slats, or maybe the twitch of a whisker, something that would confirm what I was dealing with. But there was nothing, just the sound, that relentless, maddening sound. Tick, 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 tick. I could not enjoy anything about my new apartment. I should have been excited. This was my fresh start, my new beginning, a place that was entirely mine. Instead, I sat on the edge of my bed with heavy eyelids and a growing knot of frustration in my chest, shifting my gaze along the top of the wall, following the invisible thing with my eyes as it made its rounds. I must have looked insane, sitting there in an empty room, head slowly turning left to right and then right to left, tracking something that I could hear but could not see. It really was maddening. I cannot stress that enough. Even when I left the bedroom, I could still hear it. In the kitchen, in the bathroom, it did not matter. The ticking followed me everywhere, or at least that is how it felt. It was like it had gotten inside my head and set up camp there, playing on loop behind my eyes. I went for a walk around the block at one point, hoping that some fresh air and distance would help me reset. It did not. I swear I could still hear it even outside, faint but unmistakable, like a phantom sound that my brain refused to let go of. By the time I got back to the apartment, I was more agitated than when I had left. That second night was brutal. I lay in bed for hours, eyes squeezed shut so tight they hurt, willing myself to fall asleep. But sleep would not come, not with that constant noise drilling into my consciousness. Back and forth, vent to doorframe to vent. It never stopped. It never even slowed down. Whatever was in that wall had the energy of something that did not need to rest, something that did not get tired, something that just kept going because going was all it knew how to do. By 2 a.m, I had reached my breaking point. I sat bolt upright in the dark, letting out a groan that was equal parts exhaustion and fury. I did not care what it was anymore. Bug, rat, raccoon, whatever. I was going to find it, and I was going to deal with it. No more lying in the dark, listening to that sound. No more pretending it would just go away on its own. I was done. I fumbled my way to the kitchen and found a screwdriver in one of the drawers, then marched back to the bedroom with the kind of determination that only true sleep deprivation can produce. I climbed up and started working on the vent cover, fighting with the screws in the dark. It turned out that the screws were not even properly set. They had just been painted over along with everything else, barely threaded into the wall. Within seconds, the plastic cover popped off with this almost comical little sound, like pulling a suction cup off a window. And just like that, the skittering stopped. For the first time since I had moved in, there was silence. Real, actual silence. It was so sudden and so complete that it almost felt louder than the noise had been. I stood there on my tiptoes, one hand gripping the screwdriver, the other hovering near the dark rectangular opening in my wall. Whatever was in there had stopped moving. It was close, though. I could feel it. I could sense it sitting just inside the duct, maybe a foot or so from the opening, frozen in place like it knew it had been discovered. That only made me angrier. The audacity of this thing keeping me awake for 2 straight nights and then just sitting there, playing possum the moment I came looking for it. I leaned in closer to the opening and hissed into the dark. I told it that I knew it was in there, that it was not fooling anyone, that it needed to get out. Stupid, I know. Talking to a vent like a crazy person. But I was not thinking straight. I had barely slept in 2 days, and the frustration had completely taken over any rational thought I might have had left. I reached my hand into the hole. The thing scrambled backward, retreating deeper into the duct. I could hear it moving away from me, those same sharp little clicks against the metal, but slower now, more cautious. I grit my teeth and pushed my arm in further. It moved back again. I followed. The inside of the vent was surprisingly clean, smooth metal that thumped and twanged as I bumbled around trying to reach whatever was hiding in there. My fingers brushed against something. Just barely, just the tips of my fingers grazing against a surface that felt wrong in a way I could not immediately identify. It was skin, but not like any animal skin I had ever touched. It was clammy and cold, almost damp, like touching something that had been sitting in a refrigerator. I assumed it was the tail of some kind of rodent, maybe a possum or a large rat, and I stretched further, trying to get a grip on it before it could slip away. Tick, 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 tick. It stayed just out of reach, taunting me always just a few centimeters beyond my fingertips. I could feel it sliding deeper into the wall, and I only had so much arm to work with. The angle was awkward, and the vent opening was not exactly generous in size. I twisted my shoulder and pressed my cheek against the wall, trying to squeeze in just a little more. This was it. This was my last chance. If I could not grab it now, I would have to give up and spend another sleepless night listening to it go back and forth. I shoved my forearm in all the way up to my elbow in one desperate burst, and my fingers closed around something. I had it. Finally, I had it. But the moment my hand wrapped around it, I knew something was horribly, unspeakably wrong. What I was holding did not feel like a rat. It did not feel like any animal I had ever touched or even heard of. It was cold, almost ice cold, with a soft exterior that had a clammy, fleshy quality to it. Too firm to be a small creature, too structured, too deliberate in its shape. My fingers explored the object in my grip, and with each passing second, the reality of what I was holding became clearer and more terrifying. There were creases, bends, multiple long, cold, cylindrical objects, each only a few inches long, varying in length. They moved independently of one another, fighting against my grasp with a frantic, wriggling energy. I felt something hard at the tip of one of them, a small, rigid shell attached to an otherwise soft surface. A fingernail. That is what it was, a fingernail. And beneath it, the soft pad of a fingertip. And next to it, another finger, and another, and another, and another. I was holding 5 fingers. 5 human fingers. My brain tried to reject what my hand was telling me. I kept feeling, hoping to find something that would prove me wrong. Something that would reveal it to be a weird animal or a piece of garbage or anything other than what it so clearly was. But the further I explored, the worse it got. I found knuckles, the distinct bumps of joints bending and flexing under thin skin. I found the back of a hand, the hard ridges of metacarpal bones running beneath the surface. I found a soft, fleshy palm in the center of the wriggling mass. There was no denying it. I was holding a human hand, an adult, living human hand, embedded inside my wall, inside my ventilation duct. I yanked my arm out of the vent on pure instinct, and the thing came with it. It was still clutched in my grip, and I stumbled backward off my tiptoes nearly tripping over the boxes stacked behind me. Now, this next part is really hard to explain, so I need to be careful about how I describe it, because I want to make sure it makes sense. When you hold someone's hand, you do not really think about the mechanics of it. You just do it. You either lace your fingers between theirs or you hold their palm, and they hold yours. It is such a natural, instinctive thing that you never stop to consider the physics of how two hands fit together. I used to hold someone's hand, actually. But that is not the point. The way I was gripping this hand, the way I had pulled it out of the wall, I was essentially holding it from the top, my fingers wrapped around the wrist area. The whole hand was balled up in my grasp, curled into a tight fist because of the way I was squeezing it. And where the wrist should have connected to an arm, there was nothing. Just a rounded nub, like the hand had grown entirely on its own, completely separate from any body. Maybe it had never been attached to a body at all. I do not know. I honestly do not know. And thinking about it too hard makes me feel like I'm losing my mind. What I do know is that the top of that nub, the place where the wrist just ended, had an opening, a cavity. A wet, warm little hole in the flesh where there should have been bone and tendon connecting it to a forearm. And that cavity had teeth. I found this out the hard way. A sharp, searing pain shot through the webbing between my thumb and my index finger, the soft, fleshy part where the two digits meet. It felt like a taut wire snapping against my skin, or like someone had taken a pair of scissors and just pinched them shut right there. It was sudden and vicious, and it hurt more than I can put into words. Bright red blood immediately began to pour from the wound, and vivid splatters appeared on the edge of the vent opening, where I had popped the plastic cover off just minutes before. The pain made me whip my wrist reflexively, and the hand went flying out of my grip. It sailed across the dark room and landed somewhere between the stacked boxes and the piles of belongings I had not yet unpacked. Into the shadows it went, disappearing from sight. For a moment, I just stood there, cradling my bleeding hand against my chest, breathing hard, my heart slamming against my ribs like it was trying to break free. I had a fleeting thought that I should probably keep an eye out for the thing, that I should find it before it found a new hiding spot. But that thought did not have time to fully form before the problem solved itself. The hand came scuttling out of the darkness on its own. It moved like a crab or maybe a spider, all 5 fingers working in unison to propel itself across the floor with alarming speed. It did not hesitate, did not pause to figure out where it was going. It made a direct line straight for the open vent hole, scrambled up the wall with those awful clicking fingers, and disappeared back into the ductwork like it had done it 1,000 times before, like it knew exactly where it needed to go. That is the part that disturbs me the most, honestly. More than the teeth, more than the bite, more than the simple, grotesque reality of a living, disembodied hand inside my wall, it does not have eyes. I saw it clearly enough in the brief moment it crossed my floor to know that there were no eyes on it anywhere. I doubt it even has a brain, at least not in any traditional sense. So how did it know where the vent was? How did it navigate straight back to the opening without bumping into anything, without taking a wrong turn, without even slowing down? It just knew. It moved with purpose and certainty, like something that understood its environment on a level that did not require sight or thought. And that idea that whatever this thing is operates on some instinct or awareness that I cannot understand or explain, that is what keeps turning over in my mind. That is the thought that will not let me rest. After the hand disappeared back into the wall, things went quiet for a while. I stood there in my bedroom, bleeding onto my shirt, trying to process what had just happened. Eventually, I picked up my phone and called the building management. I do not know what I expected. I think some part of me just needed to hear another human voice, needed to tell someone what I had experienced, even if they did not believe me. They did not believe me. The person who answered sounded half asleep and completely uninterested, and when I started trying to explain what had happened, they basically laughed at me. They said they do not appreciate prank calls and that they have a very low tolerance for that kind of thing. They also made a point of telling me that they do not enjoy being called before 5 in the morning. Then they hung up. So that is where I am right now, sitting on my bed, watching the sun start to creep through the blinds, having not slept a single minute for the second night in a row. I left the vent cover off. I cannot bring myself to go anywhere near that hole again, not after what happened. If the hand decides to come out, then it comes out. I do not think it will, though. It seemed pretty eager to get back inside the wall, and I get the feeling that it prefers the dark, the enclosed space, the anonymity of being hidden behind drywall and aluminum. After enough time passed, and the silence stretched on long enough, the ticking started again. The exact same pattern as before. Left vent to closet doorframe. Closet doorframe to left vent. Back and forth, like nothing had happened. Like I had not just pulled a living, biting, teeth-having human hand out of that duct. Like it did not care at all. Tick, 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 tick. I have been staring at the open vent for hours now. There are little dry droplets of my blood around the edges of the opening, dark red turning brown as they dry. My hand is still bleeding, actually. I have not even put a bandage on it. I probably should. But every time I think about getting up to find the first aid kit, I just cannot make myself move. The cut feels strange, not just painful, but wrong somehow. There is a tingling sensation deep in the wound, a feeling like something inside the muscles of my thumb is flexing and twitching and tensing on its own. It is similar to a nervous twitch, but more deliberate, more rhythmic, like something in there is moving with purpose. The last time I looked down at it, and I am trying very hard not to look down at it again, the wound had opened up in a way that did not look right. The flesh around the edges was pulled back, almost peeled, and there was something white starting to push its way out from inside. My brain keeps trying to tell me what it is. My brain keeps whispering the word tooth. I keep telling myself that it is just bone, that the bite went deep enough to expose bone, and that is what I am seeing. But the shape is wrong for bone. It is too pointed, too uniform, too much like what a tooth looks like when it is just barely breaking through a gum line. I am going to try to find someone in the building when the sun comes up properly. A maintenance worker, a neighbor, anyone. I need another person to come into this apartment and see what is going on. Or at the very least hear the sound and confirm that I am not losing my mind. Maybe I will put in a complaint about something else. Something normal, like the sink or the thermostat, just to get someone through the door. Then I can figure out a way to bring up the real issue without sounding completely insane. First impressions matter, after all, and showing up at a stranger's door raving about a disembodied hand living in your ventilation system is probably not the best way to introduce yourself to the neighbors. Tick, 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 tick. It just keeps going. Back and forth, like it never runs out of energy, like it never needs to stop and rest. The sound fills my apartment like water filling a bathtub, slow and steady and relentless until there is no room left for anything else. I cannot think over it. I cannot function through it. It is all there is. I keep looking at my hand. I told myself I would not, but I keep doing it anyway. The white thing is bigger now. It is definitely pushing outward, rising from the wound like a seed sprouting from soil. The tingling has gotten worse, and there is a new sensation alongside it. A pressure, like something is growing in there that does not fit, something that is making room for itself inside muscles and tendons that were never meant to accommodate it. Tick, 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 tick. The sun is almost up. I have not slept. My hand is throbbing. The sound never stops. I really wish it had just been a rat. Story 5. I am typing this from the bathroom because the thing that is in our bedroom is not my husband. It looks exactly like him. It sounds exactly like him. It walks exactly like him. But it does not act like him at all. I do not know what that thing is, but I know deep in my heart that something is terribly wrong. This whole nightmare started only a few minutes ago. I was lying in bed when I heard something crash in the living room. It was a loud noise like glass breaking into pieces on the floor. My first thought was that it was probably just our cat being clumsy again, because he likes to knock things over in the middle of the night. But then another thought crept into my mind, and it was not a pleasant one. What if it was not the cat at all? What if someone had broken into our house? The thought of a burglar being downstairs made my blood run cold. I turned to my husband, who was already awake from the noise, and I asked him if he could go check it out. I told him to be careful and to take something with him just in case. He nodded and got out of bed slowly. He reached into the nightstand drawer and pulled out his gun. I wanted to go with him because I did not want him to face any danger alone, but he looked at me with those caring eyes and told me to stay in the bedroom. He said he did not want me to get hurt if something bad was actually happening down there. I agreed, even though every part of me wanted to follow him down those stairs. So I waited in the darkness of our bedroom, listening carefully for any sounds from below. The minutes passed by so slowly that it felt like hours. At first, I heard nothing at all, and the silence was almost worse than any noise could have been. Then I heard something that made my heart stop for a moment. It was a muffled sound that was sharp like a gunshot, but it was not loud enough to be a normal gunshot. It sounded like it had been silenced somehow, or like something had absorbed most of the noise. I knew our neighbors would not have heard that sound, even though it echoed in my ears like thunder. Fear gripped me tightly, and I could not just sit there any longer. I grabbed the baseball bat that we keep under the bed for emergencies, and I made my way toward the stairs. My hands were shaking, and my heart was pounding so hard that I could hear it in my ears. I took each step slowly, trying not to make any noise as I went down. I was expecting the worst. I was expecting to find my husband hurt or to come face to face with an intruder. But then, suddenly, the lights turned on, and I saw my husband walking up the stairs toward me as if nothing had happened at all. He looked completely calm, and there was not a scratch on him. He did not look worried or scared or even slightly out of breath. He just walked up those stairs like it was any other night. He looked at me and said that it was just the cat messing around again. He said there was nothing to worry about and that everything was fine. I asked him if he was sure, and he said yes without any hesitation. Then he told me he would be waiting in the bedroom, and before I could say anything else, he just walked past me and headed back to our room. I stood there on the stairs feeling confused and uneasy. Something about the way he spoke did not feel right. His voice sounded like his voice, but there was something missing from it. It was flat and empty, like someone was reading words from a script without understanding what they meant. And his eyes looked strange, too. When he looked at me, it was like he was looking through me instead of at me. His eyes seemed empty, like they were staring into some kind of void, that only he could see. I tried to shake off the feeling and told myself that I was just being paranoid. Maybe he was just tired from the long day we had. Maybe the adrenaline from checking out the noise had left him feeling drained. I decided to go downstairs and see what had actually happened with the cat and the broken glass. When I got to the living room, I was surprised to find that everything looked completely spotless. There was no broken glass anywhere. There were no signs that anything had been knocked over or disturbed. The room looked exactly the same as it had before we went to bed. The only thing that was different was that my husband had left his gun sitting on the kitchen counter. Just the gun and nothing else. No broken glass cleaned up. No cat running around, just the gun sitting there by itself. I found this very strange, but I did not want to overthink it, so I headed back to the bedroom. But as I was walking toward the stairs, he appeared suddenly right in front of me out of nowhere. I did not hear him coming at all. He was just there, standing in front of me like he had materialized out of thin air. I screamed and told him to stop scaring me like that. My heart was racing from the shock of him appearing so suddenly. He just looked at me with that same blank expression and said that he was heading down to acquire energy. That was exactly how he said it. Not that he was hungry or that he wanted a snack. He said he was going to acquire energy like a robot would say it. I tried to laugh it off, even though it made me uncomfortable. I told him that was a weird way of saying he wanted to get some food. I mentioned that I thought there was only tuna left in the cabinet, but I knew he would not want that because he has always hated tuna. He has hated tuna for as long as I have known him. He cannot stand the smell or the taste of it, and he has told me many times that it makes him feel sick. But before I could even finish my sentence, he sped past me so fast that I barely saw him move. He went straight to the cabinet, without any hesitation at all. He grabbed the can of tuna and opened it and started eating it like he had never eaten food before in his entire life. He was not just eating it. He was devouring it. He scraped every last bit of tuna out of that can like his life depended on it. Then, without saying a single word, he went straight back to the bedroom. I stood there in the kitchen trying to process what I had just witnessed. My husband, who has hated tuna for the entire time I have known him, just ate an entire can of it, like it was the most delicious thing he had ever tasted. Something was definitely not right, but I did not want to believe what my gut was telling me. I decided to look for our cat because I realized I had not seen him since this whole thing started. Our cat is named Chase, and we have had him for 4 years now. He is part of our family, and he usually comes running when he hears us moving around the house. I searched everywhere for him. I checked all of his favorite hiding spots under the couch and behind the curtains and inside the closet. I looked in every room and every corner, but Chase was nowhere to be found. I was about to give up and go back to the bedroom when I noticed something shiny under the table in the living room. I got down on my knees and reached under the table to pick it up. When I pulled it out, I felt my stomach drop. It was an empty bullet casing. My husband had fired his gun, but there was no sign of any bullet hole anywhere in the house. If he had fired at an intruder, where was the damage? If he had fired at the wall or the floor, there would be a hole somewhere. But there was nothing, just this empty casing that proved a shot had been fired. I had so many questions running through my head, but no answers to any of them. I took a deep breath and headed to the bedroom because I did not know what else to do. When I walked in, the room was completely dark. I could see the shape of my husband lying in the bed, but something about the way he looked made me feel uneasy. Every time I tried to look at his face, it seemed wrong. It looked smooth and blank, like a face that had been erased or like a face that was not quite finished being formed. I got into bed beside him and tried to act normal, even though every part of me was screaming that something was horribly wrong. I asked him if he had seen Chase anywhere in the house. I tried to keep my voice calm and casual, like it was just a normal question. He replied by asking me what I was talking about. He said the word "what" like he had never heard me mention Chase before. I told him I was talking about our cat. I said his name is Chase, and we have had him for 4 years now. How could he not know what I was talking about? He responded by calling Chase the feline. He did not call him a cat or by his name. He called him the feline and said he had not seen it. The way he spoke was so cold and detached, like he was talking about something that meant nothing to him at all. I tried to push past the fear that was building inside me, and I reached out to embrace him like I do every night before we fall asleep. But the moment I put my arms around him, I felt something that made my skin crawl. His skin was not normal. It felt sweaty and slimy, like something that was not supposed to be touched. And when I tried to hold him closer, he started jerking violently, like he was trying to break free from my grip. He moved in a way that was not human at all. It was like his body was rejecting my touch on some fundamental level. I let go immediately because I was too scared to hold on. Now things were feeling completely wrong, and I could no longer pretend that everything was okay. I lay there in the darkness, trying to calm myself down. I tried to tell myself that maybe he was just tired. Maybe he was coming down with something, and that was why he was acting so strange. But then I noticed something that made my blood turn to ice. I could not hear him breathing. There was no sound coming from his side of the bed at all. When you sleep next to someone every night, you get used to the sound of their breathing. You know their rhythm, and you can hear them inhale and exhale, even when everything else is silent. But there was nothing. No breathing, no exhale, no sound of life at all. It was like lying next to a corpse. That was the moment I knew for certain that whatever was lying next to me in that bed was not my husband. I did not know what it was or where my real husband had gone, but I knew I had to get away from this thing. I slowly got out of bed, trying to move as quietly as possible. I grabbed my laptop because I needed to tell someone what was happening. I needed to reach out for help. I thought the thing in the bed was asleep, so I tried to tiptoe toward the bathroom. But then it spoke, and its voice made me freeze in place. It asked me why I was still awake. But the voice was different now. It had stopped trying to sound like my husband. The voice was significantly lower and deeper, like something that was not even trying to pretend anymore. I told it that I was just going to the bathroom. I tried to keep my voice steady, even though I was terrified. I grabbed my laptop and rushed into the bathroom as fast as I could. I locked the door behind me and leaned against it, trying to catch my breath. That was 15 minutes ago. I have been sitting in this bathroom, typing this out, and trying to figure out what to do. But for the past 10 minutes, that thing has been standing outside the door saying the same thing over and over again. At first, it sounded almost normal. It said, "Honey, come out," in a voice that was close to my husband's, but not quite right. Then it said it again, "Honey, come out." But this time there was something different about the way it said it. The words were the same, but they sounded more demanding and less human with each repetition. Now the voice does not sound human at all anymore. It sounds like something ancient and terrible, trying to form words that it does not understand. It sounds like something that has never been human, but is trying very hard to pretend that it is. And it keeps saying the same thing over and over again. "Honey, come out. Come out. Come out." The voice is getting louder and angrier, and I do not know how long this bathroom door is going to hold. I do not know where my real husband is, or if he is even still alive. I do not know what happened to our cat. All I know is that something is very wrong, and that thing outside this door is not my husband, no matter how much it looks like him. If anyone is reading this, please send help. I am at my address, and there is something in my house that is not human. I do not know how much longer I can stay in here. The door is starting to shake now, and the voice just keeps repeating those same words over and over again. Come out, come out, come out. Story 6. Somebody brought a camera into my shop not too long ago. He was a rough-looking guy, probably homeless. The kind of person who finds things lying around and figures he can turn them into a few dollars. The camera itself was about 10 years old, maybe a little more, but for its age it was in surprisingly decent shape. The body had some scratches, and the lens cap was missing, but everything else seemed to work fine. We talked for a minute. He told me what he wanted for it, and I told him I would give him $30. He took the money and left without saying another word. I set the camera behind the counter and figured I would get to it later when things slowed down. That evening, after I locked the front door and flipped the sign to closed, I brought the camera to my workbench in the back room and started taking it apart. I do that with most of the electronics people bring in. You clean them up, replace what needs replacing, and sell them for a little more than what you paid. It is not glamorous work, but it keeps the lights on. As I was pulling the casing apart and checking the internals, I noticed that the SD card was still inside. That is not exactly unusual. People forget to remove them all the time, or they just do not care. Most of the time, the cards are either empty or full of blurry photos that nobody would ever want to look at again. I almost popped it out and tossed it in the drawer with the others, but something made me pause. Maybe it was boredom. Maybe it was the fact that the shop had been dead quiet for weeks, and I had not had a single interesting thing happen to me in longer than I could remember. I like to think I am the kind of guy who keeps his head down and stays out of other people's personal lives. I really do. But when business is slow and the hours stretch out like taffy, you start reaching for anything that might keep your mind from going numb. So I kept the card and told myself I would take a look later, just out of curiosity, just to see if there was anything on it at all. That night, after my wife had gone to bed, I sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop and slid the SD card into the reader. The little icon popped up on the screen, and I clicked it open. What I found made me sit back in my chair. There were hundreds of video files on the card, maybe thousands. I scrolled down, and the list just kept going, file after file after file, each one dated and numbered in order. They were not random clips either. They were vlogs. Personal vlogs, the kind where someone sits in front of a camera and talks directly into the lens like they are writing in a diary. Whoever owned this camera had been recording themselves consistently for what looked like the past 6 years. Every few days, sometimes every single day, they had sat down and pressed record and talked. I stared at the screen for a long time. Part of me said to close the laptop, pop the card out, and throw it away. It was not mine. These were not meant for me. But the other part of me, the part that had been sitting in a quiet shop staring at the walls for weeks, clicked on the very first video. The clip opened, and a young woman appeared on screen. She looked like she could not have been any older than 19. She had blonde, curly hair that fell just past her shoulders, bright green eyes that caught the light from whatever lamp she had on her desk, and a smile that hit me right in the chest the moment I saw it. There was something about her. It was not just that she was pretty, although she was. It was not just her voice, which was warm and easy and a little nervous in that first video, the way someone sounds when they are trying something new and are not sure if they like it yet. There was something else, something harder to name, a kind of openness maybe, a kind of innocence that came through the screen so strongly it almost felt physical. She introduced herself, talked a little about why she wanted to start recording these videos, laughed at herself for being awkward, and then the clip ended. It was only a few minutes long. I clicked the next one immediately. For the next 3 weeks, watching her videos became the center of my life. Every evening, I would close up the shop, sit down at my workbench in the back, crack open a beer, and plug in my laptop. I would watch for hours. She talked about everything. She talked about starting medical school and how nervous she was. She talked about a guy in one of her classes that she thought was cute, but was too shy to talk to. She talked about her painting, which she did as a hobby on the weekends, setting up a little easel in her dorm room and working on portraits while music played in the background. She talked about missing her family, about her favorite foods, about books she was reading, about dreams she had at night that she could not quite remember in the morning. Every video ended, and I wanted the next one. It was like a television show that hooks you at the end of every episode and makes it impossible to stop. Just one more, I would tell myself. Just one more, and then I will go home. But one more always turned into 5 more, and 5 more turned into 10. And before I knew it, I was looking at the clock and seeing that it was almost 11 at night. I felt guilty about it, too. I was not stupid. I knew what I was doing was strange. I knew that spending my evenings watching a stranger's private videos instead of going home to my wife was not normal behavior. But I kept finding ways to justify it. I told myself it was harmless. I told myself I was just curious and that anyone in my position would do the same thing. I told myself I would stop soon. Meanwhile, my wife was at home alone every night. She never complained, at least not at first. She would already be in bed by the time I walked through the door. And in the morning, she would ask me how work was, and I would say fine. And that would be the end of it. One night, though, I came home later than usual and found the dining room table set with our good plates. There were candles on the table, or what was left of them. They had burned all the way down to little stubs of wax stuck to the holders. There was food on the plates, cold and untouched, sitting there like it had been waiting for hours. I stood in the doorway and stared at it, and tried to remember what day it was. Then it hit me. It was our 10-year anniversary. She had cooked dinner and set the table and lit candles and waited for me. And I had been sitting in the back of my shop watching a stranger talk about her life on a tiny laptop screen. I stood there for a long time, looking at that cold food and those burned-out candles. Then I went to bed. Oh, well, I told myself. Oh, well. The videos kept going. I kept watching. But somewhere around the middle of the timeline, things started to shift. It was not sudden. It was more like a slow turn, the way a road curves so gradually you do not realize you are heading in a completely different direction until you look up and nothing around you is familiar anymore. What had started as warm and innocent began to crack. In some of the videos, I could hear yelling, not from outside the room, not from a neighbor or a television in the background. It was her. She was arguing with someone, her voice rising and falling, sharp and angry, except that when the camera showed the room, there was nobody else there. She was alone. She was sitting on her bed or standing by her desk, shouting at empty air, gesturing with her hands, her face twisted up with frustration or fear or something I could not quite read. Then the clip would end, and the next one would start, and she would be calm again, smiling, talking about her day like nothing had happened. One video shook me more than the others. She was sitting on the floor of her dorm room with her back against the bed. The camera was on the desk, angled down at her. She was crying. Not the kind of crying where someone wipes their eyes and pulls themselves together. This was deep, body-shaking crying. The kind that comes from somewhere so far down inside you that it sounds almost animal. She sat there and cried for over an hour. I know because I watched the whole thing. I could not make myself stop. Then, without any transition, without even a cut in the footage, she stopped. She looked up at the camera and smiled. But the smile was wrong. I had watched dozens of her videos by then. I knew her smile. I knew the way her lips moved, the way her eyes crinkled, the way her whole face seemed to light up from the inside. This was not that. This smile was wider than usual, just slightly. Just enough to notice if you had been paying attention the way I had. The warmth was gone. The innocence I had felt so strongly in those early videos was no longer there. In its place was something that looked like a performance. She was smiling because smiling was what she was supposed to do, not because she felt it. But the thing that kept nagging at me, the thing that kept me up that night long after I turned the laptop off, was the question of who she was performing for. She was alone in her room. There was no audience. There was no one watching. Unless she was not alone at all, and whatever was in that room with her was something I could not see through the screen. I felt terrible. I felt like I was invading something sacred and private, like I had broken into someone's house and was reading their diary by flashlight. I felt possessive of her story in a way that made me uncomfortable with myself. But I could not stop. The videos kept getting darker and stranger, and each one pulled me deeper. In several clips, she walked around her dorm room with white towels draped over her arms, carefully covering every mirror she could find. The mirror on the back of the door, the small one on her desk, even a compact that was sitting on her dresser. She covered them all, tucking the towels tight, so that no reflective surface was visible. She did this calmly, methodically, like it was a routine she had done many times before. She never explained why. She also started painting more. In the early videos, painting had been a casual hobby, something she did to relax. Now it was something else. She painted the same portrait over and over again. It was always the same person, the same face, but each version was slightly different from the last. A little narrower here, a little sharper there. The jawline would change, or the spacing of the eyes, or the shape of the mouth. She would finish one, set it aside, start another, and make tiny adjustments as if she were trying to get closer and closer to something she could see in her mind but could not quite capture on the canvas. The portraits began to fill her room. They leaned against the walls, sat propped on chairs, lay flat on the floor. Dozens of them, all staring out with that same, almost right face. There were moments when I seriously questioned whether any of this was real. Part of me wondered if the whole thing was staged, some kind of art project or horror series she had put together on purpose. People do that kind of thing. They create fake found footage and put it out into the world and wait for someone to find it. Maybe that was all this was. But then there were the moments that felt too raw to be fake, too ugly and too painful, and those were the ones that made my stomach turn. In one video, she sat in front of the camera and reached up and grabbed her curls with both hands. She pulled them back behind her head as far as they would go, stretching the hair tight against her scalp so that her face changed shape, pulling the skin around her temples and forehead taut. She held the hair there with one hand, and with the other she picked up a small box of tacks from her desk, the kind you push into a bulletin board. One by one, she pressed them into her scalp to hold the hair in place. Her hands were shaking so badly that she missed several times, and each time the tack went in, she flinched, but she did not stop. She just kept going, pushing the sharp points through her skin and into whatever was beneath, pinning her own hair to her own head, like she was stapling fabric to a frame. I watched the whole thing with my hand over my mouth. My stomach was rolling. I thought about calling the police. I thought about closing the laptop and walking away and never looking at the card again. I thought about whether this was a real person in real danger and whether I had some kind of responsibility to do something. But I did not do anything. I just sat there. And then I clicked the next video. By now, her room was almost entirely covered with portraits. They were everywhere, on every surface, leaned against every wall, stacked in corners, spread across the floor like tiles. She was on her hands and knees crawling between them, picking them up one at a time and holding them close to her face, studying them with a frantic intensity that made me grip the edge of my desk. She was searching for something. A specific image, a specific version of that face, one that matched whatever she was seeing in her mind. She could not find it. She started yelling. I leaned closer to the screen and turned the volume up as high as it would go, trying to make out what she was saying. Her voice was ragged and desperate, cracking on every other word. I could almost hear it. I was so close to understanding. And then the video ended. The screen went black. The file was over. I clicked the arrow for the next video. Nothing happened. There was no next video. That was the last file on the card. I sat there staring at the black screen, my pulse hammering in my throat. I pulled the SD card out and pushed it back in. I refreshed the folder. I searched for hidden files. I checked the recycle bin, the backup folders, everything I could think of. There was nothing else. The story just stopped, mid-sentence, mid-scream, like someone had ripped the last pages out of a book and burned them. I went back to the first video. I do not know exactly what I was looking for. Maybe I thought I had missed something. Maybe I just wanted to see her face again the way it had been at the beginning, warm and bright and full of life. But as I watched those early clips with fresh eyes, knowing everything I now knew, I started noticing things I had not seen before. Even in the very first videos, if you looked closely, there were faint lines on her face, thin, barely visible markings, like someone had drawn on her skin with a light pencil. They looked like measurements, the kind of lines a surgeon might draw before an operation, mapping distances between features, marking where cuts would go. I had not noticed them the first time around because her smile and her eyes and her warmth had been so overwhelming that I had not been looking at anything else. But they were there. They had always been there. And her teeth. In the early videos, her teeth were normal, a little uneven, a little crowded in the front the way most people's teeth are. But over time, they changed. They became straighter, then too straight. Then they seemed to sharpen, the edges becoming finer and more defined until they no longer looked like regular teeth at all. Her cheeks changed, too. They hollowed out slowly, sinking deeper into her skull with each passing video until the bones underneath pressed out against the skin like tent poles. When she smiled, the skin folded over itself in ways that did not look natural, bunching and creasing around the corners of her mouth in tight little ridges. And still she smiled. She always smiled. I needed more. This could not be how it ended. I could not just sit there with an unfinished story rotting in my head. So I started searching. I went online and began looking for any trace of her. I searched for young women matching her description. Blonde curly hair, green eyes, medical school student, artist, anything that might narrow it down. I combed through student directories for every medical school I could find. I scrolled through social media profiles for hours, clicking through hundreds of faces that were not hers. I searched missing persons databases, reading through case after case, looking at photos of women who had vanished, hoping and dreading that I would recognize one of them. The blue light of the laptop screen burned my eyes until they ached, but I did not stop. I searched for names, though I did not have one. I searched for numbers, dates, locations, any detail I could pull from the background of her videos. I looked at the posters on her walls, the textbooks on her desk, the view from her window. I cross-referenced everything I could think of. I found nothing, absolutely nothing. It was as if she had never existed at all. No profile, no record, no mention anywhere on the entire internet. She was a ghost who had smiled at me through a screen for 3 weeks and then vanished. It started consuming me. I stopped eating regular meals. I would sit at the workbench all day with the laptop open, searching, scrolling, clicking, going back to the videos and watching them again for clues I might have missed. I forgot about the shop. Customers would knock on the door and I would not hear them. The phone would ring and I would not answer. I forgot about my wife almost entirely. She became a voice calling from another room, a shape moving in the hallway, a presence I was vaguely aware of but could not bring myself to focus on. All I could think about was the girl. I had to find her. I had to know what happened to her. I had to know if she was still out there somewhere, or if whatever had been happening to her in those videos had finished what it started. One evening, I caught my reflection in the shop window and stopped cold. I barely recognized myself. My face was pale, not just tired pale, but a grayish white that looked unhealthy even under the warm streetlight outside. My cheeks had sharpened and sunk inward, the bones pressing against the skin in a way that reminded me of something I did not want to think about. Blue veins were visible under the skin of my forehead, thin lines branching out like cracks in old plaster. My eyes looked like they had retreated deeper into my skull, sitting in shadows that had not been there a month ago. My whole body had a grayish tone to it, a familiar gray, a gray I had seen before, though I could not remember where. I stared at myself for a long time. Then I told myself it did not matter. I looked away from the window and went back to the laptop. None of that mattered. Finding her was the only thing that mattered. I do not remember exactly when it happened. Time had stopped meaning much to me by then. Days bled into nights and back into days. But at some point I found myself sitting in my back room at the shop with the old camera set up on the desk in front of me. The red recording light was on, blinking slowly, and I was looking directly into the lens. On my head was a blonde wig. It was not a good one. The curls were too stiff, too shiny, not quite the right shade, and it sat on my head at an angle that was slightly off, but it was close enough. I had positioned it carefully, pulling the curls forward to frame my face the way hers had framed hers. I straightened my back and tried to smile. "My name is—" I started, and then I stopped. The word would not come. I sat there with my mouth open, trying to find it, reaching for it the way you reach for a word that is right on the tip of your tongue. What was my name? I knew it a moment ago. I knew it this morning. I knew it yesterday. But right now, sitting in front of this camera with this wig on my head and this light blinking at me, the name was gone. It was just empty space where something used to be. From somewhere above me, from the ceiling, from upstairs, from whatever world existed outside this room, I heard a voice. It was my wife. She was calling my name, I think, or calling for someone. The sound was faint and muffled, like it was coming through water. I did not turn around. I did not answer. I kept my eyes on the camera. "Anyway," I said, and the word came out smoother than I expected. steadier than I felt. The red light blinked in time with my heartbeat. Or my heartbeat blinked in time with the red light, and for a moment I could not tell which was following which. I smiled into the lens. Today was my first day of medical school.